Well, this is it. 1 year Ridgeline Leadership Podcast, 52 episodes
Can't
in the
believe it, man.
books. We've been putting out episodes each week for the last year. There have been a couple misses, I get it. And to that point, because there have been weeks that we've missed, we have decided that we are going to go probably to like an every other kind of episode being released because honestly, we want to make sure that first off, we're able to keep up with content. We're obviously running a business and doing other things like that. However, we want to keep giving this content and making sure the content is really good content and that we're not going to rush through things. So, most likely it will be in every other week. We might slip a one in there to have three in a row. But we are going to switch things up a little bit because we want to bring quality and we want to help you continue to grow in your path of leadership.
Yeah. And in that spirit, continuing our path of leadership, we talked last time about reading the room, right? So you've read the room now. You have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Maybe it's a meeting you walked into. Perhaps you just walked into a room with a group of your teammates and they're all talking and chatting. Whatever the situation, as that leader, knowing what to do with the information that you receive from reading that room, that's really our next step, right?
Mm.
So we kind of alluded to this quite a bit actually in our last episode about um, going into what our next steps are. And if you've not listened to that podcast episode number 51, I would recommend going back. If you've not listened to that, go back and listen to that now, and then jump in here because there's a lot of things that we talk about that is it really is important that you know the why behind it and the information behind it on reading the room before we jump into what we're going to talk about today. So I would recommend you go back to that. But if you're with us now, let's jump into taking that information and making it actionable.
Yeah. So actually, like first off, if you've been listening to us with us up to this point, thank you. Thank you so
Yes,
much. Like that's 52 episodes. Hopefully the
that's
content's
true.
been good for you. Hopefully you've grown in this. I want to say that as well before we really dive into this. It's an honor to be able to do this. It's fun to be able to do this. But I'm glad that it's the content is creating more conversation. I mean, it's so fun just to be around you out in the real world and be talking and people are like, hey, when you said this, what did you mean by this? Can we dig into that more? And
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff. So it's been really fun to do that. So thank you so much. So back to the episode, back to reading a room. Reading a room, as we talked about in the last episode, is far more about being a detective of nature, right? Like we focus on observing those people in the rooms, checking tone, checking appearance, like what's the dress? Am I dressed the correct way? And if that matters, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But now, after you've done that, what do you do with it? Right? Like there's a good way to know how to acclimate and be in that room, but what is the purpose of being in that room? Is it just to go in and have all your beliefs completely like changed? I don't necessarily think so, right? Like I don't think the idea is that you go in, change yourself to fit the room, change your beliefs, change everything about yourselves, your thoughts, your feelings, just to satisfy that room. I don't think so. I think that's inauthentic. However, um, we can be respectful in that place. But unless you've been truly compelled in that room or in that environment to change your beliefs or thoughts or whatever, there's no reason to, okay? That's not going to really do anything for the room. So being able to read a room is great. It's important. But what do you do with it after that point?
Yeah.
And I think a lot about like just negative settings. Going into a room, negative people, they're everywhere. And I think it's more important to say not negative people, negative mindsets are everywhere. I think it's probably better to treat people as just neutral and not like positive, negative, because the mindset is the thing
Yeah.
that's sinking in and sitting in on top of someone's brain that causes something else. So, yes, there are negative people more or less, but I think it's the mindset that's the issue. But how do you walk through that? Like, think of even just like driving down the road and someone cuts you off, how immediately that can ruin your whole day. So negative environments have power. If you wake up late, let's call that a negative circumstance. You woke up late, how it ends up throwing your day off drastically. So
Oh,
we've talked about, we've talked about in prior episodes just about like how circumstances shouldn't be what creates our results, but our thoughts, emotions, actions should drive our results.
yeah.
But first, like we've got to get to a point where we understand that a room does have power if we're not in control of how we manage our
Mm,
thoughts, emotions, feelings. And negativity is strong. So when thinking, how do you, I keep saying manage a room, but I think really it's how do you influence a room?
mm, yeah.
Or what do you do? Maybe is the better question. What do you do with a room when you get to those points? And I think it's really one of three things. Either you fight the room's demeanor, right? You leave the room, or you allow the room to be as is. And I know that's like, ooh, wow, crazy.
Yeah.
But there are those three things are really it. And I think that doing one of those three is appropriate no matter like there's not like always fight the room's demeanor or always leave
Yeah.
the room or always allow the room to be as is. I don't think that there's an always. I think it's so circumstantial, but you have to have the wisdom to understand, what do I do here? So, do you fight the room? Do you say, "Hey, how do I motivate? How do I manage or how do I influence change or influence people to action?" Because that's what we do in a room a lot of times, and that's how you walk in and you have authority and you can do those things. Or do you leave a room? Do you just say, "This is toxic and I don't know that I can do anything for this?" Or do you go into a room and you go, "My message, the thing I'm going to push is not going to land here." And that's okay too. Or do you just walk in and you allow the room to be? Maybe the room is already doing what it should be doing. I just wouldn't think that you always have to come in and change everything, because I don't think that's the case. Um, this is essentially where you have to kind of transition, and I don't have a better word for this, but to being like a presenter, right? Like when you walk in, whether it's you're actually doing a presentation, or you're just going and presenting and talking with people in the room, being able to go in, think about why the room needs to be influenced for the greater
Mhm.
good. Could be that everyone is down and needs to have some kind of like spark. It could be that the room rightly needs to mourn, but I think you gotta think, what is best for the room at large here, okay? Commanding a room gets a really bad rep.
Yeah.
Does. It gets this, like, well, they just come in and own the room, and they just take over everything, and there are those people, and I have been at fault greatly for doing that. Um, but it's not commanding a room's not about manipulating a room for ill got. Like instead, it's really about trying to lead a room to a healthy,
Mhm.
victorious end. Is this room going to accomplish what it should accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit something really important too with the idea of commanding the room, um, and like reading from the room what needs to be done. Back when I was in college, I did traveling theater, and part of my job, part of my role, and my college studies at the time was directing others in in the production. I would teach them what to do, how to say it, where to move on the stage, things like that. And that's where when I think of you saying commanding a room or presenting, that's where my mind immediately goes, because I did that so many times where I would walk into an auditorium or onto an area where they had the stage, like a gymnasium, they had a stage set up, and I immediately had to read all of the people and everything that was going on for the intent and purpose of becoming that presenter. And I had to become that presenter. And there was a couple things that like some of these things I wish I had known back then, because it would have made me so much better at what I did then. I'm glad I know them now. But there's a couple things with your presentation, and that is what we're talking about here. Is you walk into that room as the leader, you've now made the decision that you're going to affect that room in one way or another. right? And that means you're going to assume that role, if we will, of the presenter. So, a couple of things to keep in mind: it's not a production, right? Presentation is not a production. You don't have to come in, take over, make this big scene with all this flair. Maybe that's what you need. Maybe you need flair, right? But you don't want to go over the top and go crazy. You want to keep it simple and concise. I was reading this article when we were preparing for this podcast, and it's by a guy named John Plank. Never heard of him before. Love this quote though. He said, "A good presentation is like a Scotsman kilt, short enough to be interesting, long enough to cover the essentials." Right? It's just,
That's awesome.
it's one of the best quotes, and it's so true. You don't want to have this presentation that you lose your audience, that you
Yeah.
lose the people you're speaking to, or all of a sudden now you've lost, as we've said it, we've kind of said it before, you've lost command of the room, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be simple and concise, to the point. And as you're presenting, keep that in mind. You don't want to go over the top. You don't want to go crazy, but you also want to keep them long enough and engaged and give them the information that they need.
Yeah. Oh, that's super good. Um, when you're going into a room, and I think this is maybe the difference between what you're talking about, that production and the presentation. A presentation goes in essentially, or influencing a room, and I'm going to kind of jump back and
Yeah.
forth between the two, influencing, managing. When you go into a room, it's not about, like you said, production is bringing a whole bunch of stuff in there to create a false environment for
Yep.
your message to land. That can be good in the right setting, such as the theater, right?
Yes.
They come in with costumes that look very
Yep.
different. You get put in a different time frame. You have to do a lot to make that room something um, fertile for you to do your work, for it to land. However, when you walk into a room as a leader, right, you're walking in, the environment's there. It is like you're taking the, I almost can conceptualize this idea of like this swirling mist, and you're just taking the mist
Mm.
and doing something with it to cause effect. It
Yeah.
isn't that you're bringing in new outside things to create the environment and then present or influence or manage people. It's that you're using what's there to effectively help people go to that next language or that next place. Okay. Um, but there are many other things that we got to be careful of in this process. Um, that production idea, bringing outside things in to try to land. Same thing can happen when we're not careful with like our body language. If
Mm.
you're going in, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go command things, and you're like hunched over and like
Yes.
not engaging, your tones off, your energy levels not there. You're probably not using the environment correctly. Okay. So, like, if you seem bored and unapproachable, well, people are not going to be engaged with you. They're not going to be
Yeah.
like, oh, this guy is worth allowing me in, because influence only happens with trust of some nature, right? I can be influenced as there's trust to be influenced. So I'm only going to allow it if it's there. If you come in and you haven't engaged and connected enough, it's not going to happen. You're just going to be met with basically a wall in the face.
Yeah, for sure. I can think back. I'm going to keep using this example of me directing theater because it's
I think it's a
one that I
really good
have.
one for this, especially. I really do. I
Um,
think it lands really
really.
well. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, the one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about energy level, one of the things that we always fought, and I say we because myself and there were other directors who dealt with this same issue. When you walk into that room, one of the biggest um, one of the biggest things you have to fight is your own level of energy,
Mm,
because a lot of times you don't have it. You don't have that energy. You're working off of a deficit of sleep. You've gone through high levels of emotion with teaching others how to emote properly. You're feeling more than they are. So you walk into that room on maybe a Tuesday or a Wednesday morning and you're just drained. And it's easy for you when you were talking about body language. My first thought went to hiding behind my coffee cup. I used to do that. I would get a cup of coffee and I would just sit down and I would just sit there and I'd let somebody else start the day, and I would sit there and wait for my energy to increase, right? Or drink some more coffee. But it never actually happened. What ended
yeah.
up happening is I had to give myself that energy. I had to match the energy and go above and beyond what the energy I wanted on from other people. And it's very easy to just allow yourself to hide behind that. It's really really frustrating. The other thing you mentioned too is like distractions and things like that. Um, I do it a lot when I talk. You can see my hands here. I talk with my hands. It can be distracting if you're doing too much, if you're fidgeting too much. The other side is true. If you're just completely stoic and unmoving, that could be a real big turnoff for a lot of people. They're not going to want to follow you. They're not going to want to listen to what's going on. They're not going to want to be motivated to whatever the purpose is that you're there to push forward. Whatever the information is that you're trying to get across, you've got to find that happy medium. You have to find that balance between just enough energy and not none energy, no energy whatsoever.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good. When you go to influence a room, it's going to take courage.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah,
Nobody goes from zero to absolute, like, let's go, just overnight. Okay.
yeah,
It's taken time to get there. There are confident people who may take that step, but honestly, it's going to take courage to try to influence people in a room. You're going to be risking, but that might be worth it. And actually, I'm going to take your coffee thing and flip it around.
okay,
Um, do little things to build your courage when walking in
yeah,
a room.
it's good.
I love having a coffee cup in my hand, walking up and talking to
Mm,
people. I don't know what it is, but it's and this sounds dumb, but it feels like this barrier between me
right.
and you that's going to allow me to do something and feel that safety more or less. I know that's
Yeah,
may sound silly, but there are things you can do to build your confidence as you're going through this influence and trying to use a room and everything in it to create good effect here.
yeah.
Um, the second thing we talked about was leaving a room, right? When, Pete, do you think leaving a room is the right thing, or like when is a room a lost cause?
I think there's a couple situations personally. One, when you get that initial read and you can sense that there is something about the environment that is not good, and nothing you do is going to change that. It may be because you don't have that confidence, right? Maybe you don't have, and we'll talk about this in a minute. Maybe you're not prepared. Maybe you're not ready to take over, right? Sometimes those situations come up. I think also when you've tried to, excuse me, when you've tried to take over the room and it's clearly failing, maybe that's a good time for you to step out before
Yeah,
compromise your values or things like that. You just need to step away from it.
yeah,
That's my
that's
thoughts
good.
anyway.
You know, another thing that I think about, because you're right. There are times that you're trying to influence, you're trying to command, if you will, the room, and it seems like a lost cause. You've said things. Sorry, there's a story that just popped into my head.
Oh,
Um,
share it.
oh, I'm going to. I'm
Okay,
going
good.
to. But I think one thing that's good is when that has happened over and over and what you've done has not landed,
Mm,
do something really unexpected. Like I
yeah.
don't know why, and this might be horrible advice, okay? But when I have come to those places, the only times like that I've done something crazy unexpected and it just shifted. It's like we were going one way and all of a sudden, boom, we're going the other.
Yeah.
And it worked. Not always, but it worked. So I don't know that you can always just intuitively know that
Yeah.
something is a lost cause until you've tried to do something just
True.
hella unexpected. And so the thing that I'm thinking of was doing a interview one time for uh, I think it was like this television interview for the trade school we're a part of, and I was talking to the reporter, and I could just like you can just kind of sense something isn't landing, and I
Yeah.
could just sense it. It was there. She was just like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I had tried everything to get things going right. Like I was like, the telling her like the whole work harder, not smarter. I think that like the idea of that is good, but it's done a lot of damage because instead of the idea of being productive, it's turned into don't work hard. And she was
Right.
like, oh, okay, and just kind of like nodding. And I finally was like, well, I I'm ready to be done with this, but I really think you need to understand this. So here we go. So I was like, she was just kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I was like, probably it was really easy to get where you got to, right? And her eyes got big. She was like, what? I was like, yeah, I mean, it was probably super easy. She's like, no, I had to work my ass off. Like she got offended by it.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I had to work my ass off. And I was like, oh, of course. Of course you did. Because hard work is not a bad thing.
Right.
And it like clicked for her and everything, the whole momentum of the interview changed, had good talks. Even after that, she and I kept texting about like the trade and stuff. And I'll still occasionally get one. So it was like it was good enough that it
Yeah.
created a relationship and a lasting kind of moving um effect. But I had to do something unexpected to really grab a hold of that room.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think anything would have really come of it, which is fine.
Yeah.
Um, and then when when do you leave a room, Pete? I'm gonna throw you on the spot. When do you leave a room the way it is? Like, what
Um,
are good signs of it?
I think for me, if there's a strong leader already there that's pushing forward what needs to be pushed forward, that's when my mentality then transitions into first follower, right? So then I become the most engaging person for the leader. I become the first responsive person for that. And I try to pull the others along with me as well. I'm still being a leader. I'm just not the vocal leader at that point.
Yeah.
So when I catch the vision of that room and I see that the vision is being pushed forward by someone else, for me, that's when I would leave it alone.
That was hella good. That was so on your feet too. I love that. That's awesome. That is so good, man. You're so right. Like, and it lets you know and check your heart motivator too. Like,
Yeah.
what are the heartstrings that are actually for walking into that room? Is it to influence? Is it to bring the vision? And you're right, man. If somebody is there and presenting the vision, it's not about you. It
Right.
is about the vision and what's happening. Um, Man, that's good. That reminds me of that Ronald Reagan quote that I'm gonna butch right here. Um, the We can do truly amazing things when it doesn't matter who gets the credit,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like that is dang. That was
I
a
love that.
ballpark hit right there, man. Good job. Um
Thanks, man.
so good. So okay, so what do we do with all this?
Yeah.
Um I think when I think about this, when we're talking about influencing a room, okay? Because really, you leave a room, your effort's done at that point. You leave a room as is. I think Pete just knocked it out of the park with those kind of things. But what do we need to do when we're influencing others and influencing a room? And I just keep coming back to this idea of confident and competent,
Mm.
right? Like you need to be confident when walking in that what your message is or what this room needs is what this room needs. Okay. You have to walk in a place of confidence. And you have to understand that if this is what the room needs, then you need to be able to back that up. You need to be able to
Right.
have the understanding and be able to answer questions and respond to things of why this really matters and why this is going to create a result that everybody needs. Okay, so um, that confident and competence is like a balance, right? I
Mm.
really feel like it's on the two sides of a balancing
Yeah.
scale. Um, if you have all confidence and no competence, and you're gonna burn out really quick. We talked about like the idea of being seed thrown onto an asphalt road. It'll sprout up really quick,
Yeah.
but it burns away pretty quick too. Um, and I feel like heavy confidence, no competence tends to be more of an ego driven thing. Tends to be a thing that isn't focused on the true vision of something. It's more focused on the person seeming confident, on the person um, having the message. But it's not the bigger picture. Flip the balance scales here of all competence, no confidence. You have all of this competence for what can help this room, what can help people get to another level, what can help people understand or move to action, but you don't have a voice.
Mm.
Man, that's that's what's at stake here. Okay. This is why helping and talking about why this is important for leaders. Man, this reminds me of, I'm gonna screw this quote up too, for sure. And I
Doubt
don't
it.
have any clue who said it, but someone said something one time. Someone said something a time in the past, and here's what they said. I feel like Bert
Roughly.
Hapley with Parks and Rec. Um, they said something to the effect that the richest place in the world is the graveyard because
Mm,
there's so many unfulfilled dreams, so much knowledge that was never
oh,
portrayed, so many visions that never came to fruition because people never took the risk. People never had the confidence to do so. Man, talk about talk about deep there. That's why if you have this competence, you got to step into a place of confidence because you don't want all of that richness, all of that
mm,
wealth that is going to hit somebody just right to go to the grave.
yeah.
You got to bring it to the room.
Do you want to know who said that? And you nailed the quote, by the way.
Did I really?
I
Let's
mean, there's
go.
more to it, but you nailed it. Les Brown said it.
Les Brown. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Yeah. He
good.
said the graveyard is the richest place on earth because it is here that you will find all the hopes and dreams that were never fulfilled.
Hmm. Dang.
Yeah.
That's good.
He goes on to talk about more things too, but I think it's interesting too. You brought up confident and competent. I think they work so well together because in most cases, competence creates the confidence, right?
Mm,
You know something, so you have the confidence, the ability to speak about it. And that's something I was thinking about as you were talking too. Like confidence, if you're really confident but you don't know anything, people are going to figure that out pretty damn quick. They're going to know that you're full of shit and that you're just speaking out of nothing, right? But
mm,
if you have the information behind it to back it up, if you've done the research, if you've prepared and you're ready to go, then your confidence will be portrayed that way with the competence, right? And I feel like that's a much better balance than trying to. And so this is something we always used to say too. Like you can fake it, right? You can fake that confidence. I can appear confident. I really can, but I can't appear competent because then I'm just pulling shit out of my ass, and people are going to
mm.
realize that it's trash and it's not worth anything. So it speaks to being prepared, right? I think kind of going back to the time maybe not to engage a room is when you aren't competent, when you know just enough about something. And this is not maybe not the best situation to fake it till you make it, but you know just enough about it to be engaged in the conversation, but not leading it. Maybe you only have half the vision.
Mm.
Maybe that's a good time to hold off too.
Well, and
Um,
also though with that, there can be a benefit to risking and like and growth to it as well. Okay, because you
okay.
have beliefs even in your competence on things, and this just happened to me recently. I was talking with someone, um, call it a room. We were in a room. It was a couple people, and I said something that I really believed with
Mm,
confidence. And I was like, "No, I really think this and this and this." And I was speaking to those things, and someone said, yeah, it would be really great if that were true, but it's not true.
mm,
And then they said, and here's why it's not true. And they led me to understand and see things. And
yeah.
as long I think as you can check your ego at the door for a lot of that kind of like an understanding, you're gonna be okay. Okay. Because when they said
Yeah.
that, I was like, yeah, that's very true. Thanks for not just pushing me off the cliff.
Right.
Like, and even though I maybe took a hit to competence, the fact that I grew in it actually
Mm,
built my competence too.
right. Yeah, I think that's really good. It's such you said it before. It's such a balance between the two of them and how they work together. It's so cool to see that. Um, I think another thing too is that kind of builds your competence really, at least in the eyes of those you're in the room with, is being there on time. Right. This is super practical stuff now,
Sure.
but
Sure.
being there on time because I read somewhere that if you show up late, you're starting off with an apology right away. The first thing you have to say is, I'm sorry for being late. I'm sorry for wasting your time. I'm sorry for putting your time below my time, right? You start off on a bad spot. So show up early or be right on time. Be ready to start, right? Um, Another thing you can do, have questions ready. remember this isn't just like a when you're talking about a presentation, you want to engage the people that are there, right? So it's not just about you speaking; it's about them and you having a conversation, bringing them along with you, leading them to a point, right? Making sure that the things have landed. Like even Blake, when you were talking about your interview, you asked a question, right?
Mhm.
asked a question about, "Hey, it was easy for you to get where you are today," and that engaged them. Have some of those ready. Be prepared with those, but also be ready for people to ask you questions because they're going to, and that's where the competence comes in again. And we've kind of already talked about this, but make sure you have a clear vision or a purpose for this, whatever it is that you're in. Maybe it's a meeting or you're just in a group of people. Make sure that there is that you do have that vision that you're pushing forward. Because without that, now you're just wandering aimlessly, and there is no leadership in that whatsoever.
Yeah. And another thing we can do to gain confidence here is do it first in your head. I talk about this a lot. I know you're not like, what? That's new. It's not. You've heard me say this over and over. Do it first in your head. It gains the confidence because your head doesn't know the difference between imaginative and actual. Like it does. Obviously, your brain can see that, but emotionally speaking, it doesn't, right? So the ability to do it in your head is going to gain confidence because we gain confidence by doing something, by experience. When it comes to experience, doing it over and over and over and doing the presentation in your head. This is like presenters, pastors, they don't do it till they and this is another quote, don't do it in such a way to where they um get it right. They do it to where they can't get it wrong, right?
Yep.
Because it's so natural in what they've
Yep.
done. But they do that by doing it here and
Hmm.
not just doing it, well, here we go. This is the only time I'm experiencing this speech. No, or this is the only time I'm experiencing being asked this question. And come on, let's be real. We all have those thoughts in our head all the time because one of our biggest
Hmm.
fears as a people is looking stupid. Okay, we're all afraid to look stupid. That's why we don't open our mouths. So, looking stupid is our biggest fear. Being asked questions and not having an answer is our biggest fear. So, there we are. Have someone ask you that question in your head and play it out in your head. Think about how you would answer that. This is
Yeah.
how you build confidence as you experience those things. You experience the emotional spike of not having an answer, the emotional spike of someone asking an off the wall question. And guys, if you don't know, this is that confidence and competence part, just say you don't know. That's
Yeah.
okay too.
That's right.
Well, yeah, but what about this? And you're like, well, actually, you should probably do this. And instead, just be like, yeah, good question. I don't know, but I'm gonna look it up because I want to know more. And let's exchange numbers. I'd love to talk about this more. That's it. That's
Yep.
how disarming or how to disarm some moment like that. But if you do
Yeah.
it in your head, you're going to gain confidence quicker.
Yeah. It's interesting how that does kind of our mentality is if I say I don't know, now everybody's going to disagree. Nobody's going to think I know anything, right? When the reality is, you say you don't know, the respect for you goes up just so much
For
higher
sure.
because nobody wants to say, "Oh, I don't know," right?
Yeah.
Same thing is true as if you're wrong and say, "Hey, guys, I was wrong." It's disarming and increases the respect for you immediately. Another thing too to keep in mind is when you're, and we kind of talked about this, alluded to it really earlier, but be engaging and engaged, right? So there's going to be time when you are speaking in that leading of the room or presenting, right? Make sure you're using eye contact, um, making sure that you're seeing those that are listening to you to see that they're actually catching what you're giving them, that it's landing, that they understand it, right? Um, Use stories and examples. We use that a lot here on the podcast. We use stories to illustrate, we use examples to illustrate so that it becomes more real. The concepts that we have become something that you can attach your own experiences to, right? Um, Showing your posture, right? How do you stand? How do you sit? Are you paying attention? Are you sitting attentively? Right? All of these things play into how your presentation comes across and how others are receiving it. Um, and then the next really important piece. This is hard, I think, for a lot of leaders, but listening when you're not speaking. Remember, we talked about like asking questions. Don't ask questions just for the sake of asking questions. Ask questions to learn about those you're speaking to and see if the information that you're giving them, if the vision that you're projecting is being caught. And if it's not, then you have to change your method or change your tactic, whatever it may be. But you've got to actually listen to them. You have to actually hear what they're saying. And if you want to check out our episode number 50, we talk about that, listening versus hearing. It's really good. And it's important to understand it's kind of a lost art, I believe, listening. And then last thing, really with engaging, is it's not a lecture. Sometimes you're going to be doing a lecture, right? If you're a college professor and you have a lecture to give, it's going to be a lecture. But most cases, as a leader of a group or a team, it's going to be two-sided. It's going to be back and forth. It's going to be conversational. It's going to be discussional. So include yourself too. When you're speaking to these people, include yourself. Don't say things like you and you guys, say we or us, right? Include yourself. Nobody wants to be yelled at. Nobody wants to be told how they're doing something or how they're doing something wrong. It's about us. It's about the team. It's about growing together as a whole.
Yeah, man, that's good. And part of that, even when you talked about the question thing, that like makes me think that you have a lot of more confidence, and it's easier to be confident when you're asking questions and when you're hearing people and kind of going back and forth. There is just that idea of being curious,
Yeah.
using open-ended questions, like you said, to include those in the conversation. When people feel included, they will listen to you. You want people to listen to you, listen to them. Don't just be like asking yes or no questions. Like, instead of being like, do you like sports? No. Okay. Do you like this? Like, that's checklist stuff. How about going,
Yes.
hey, what kind of things are you into? Okay. Now they're going to engage. When you're actually interested in what they're doing, you're going to open up the ability to be influential to others.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've read the room, we've gathered the information. Now we're moving to take the next steps. We become the leader in the room. We want to influence and motivate those in the room or the situation. Or maybe we've decided, hey, we're going to step out of the room.
Yeah, later.
Yeah, exactly. Or we're going to leave it as is and become that first follower. But
Yeah.
for illustration purposes, let's say you're going to take that leadership role. As leaders, that's something we tend to step towards. We tend to feel that draw to being that leader.
Mm.
Be confident and competent. Keep those in balance. It's important that those are in balance. Do it first in your head. There's so much value in prepping that way. There's so much value in going through it in your head. I remember times I would walk into a room and I've already said my hellos and good mornings in my morning speech before I even walked in that room 10, 15 times because I want to make sure it's right and I make sure I get the information out there properly. Um, be engaged and engaging and be curious. Um, with this being the 52nd episode, one of the things that we want to also roll out too, right? We've done this for a year now. We're really excited. One thing we want to roll out too is an opportunity for you guys to be able to interact with us. So if you have a question for us, you've got a suggestion for a topic, or you just want to drop us a note, you can send an email to us. The email is rlp@ridgelinei.com. We'll make sure to put that in the notes down here so you can see that written out, but rlp@ridgelinei.com.
And even if you want to, like, I think it'd even be cool if you wanted to even do like a voice message or something
Yeah.
that we could grab and throw into the episode. Like, hey, how do you overcome something like this? It'd be cool to have a Q&A episode.
That'd be awesome.
Or a Q and hopeful response.
That's
Question
right.
and response episode.
And
Not
response.
necessarily the
Q&R.
answer.
That's right. Yep, for sure. Well, again, it's rlp@ridgelinei.com. Shoot us a note, drop us an audio question, or just a note if you want to. Love to hear from you guys. Thanks so much for joining us this week on the Ridgeline Leadership Podcast. See you guys next time.